Why this war of Donald Trump's choosing? As the death and destruction widen in Iran and around the region, as oil and gas markets take fright, the U.S. president's reasons for launching what his administration dubs Operation Epic Fury continue to vary, as do the stated scale and duration. What's consistent is the White House's messaging cranked out over social media by Gen Z handlers who've taken Silicon Valley's move fast and break things mantra and turned it into memes that even borrow actual video game footage. Is it working? Do the fireballs that kill real human beings in the Middle East seem to inspire admiration and awe among voters in the United States? Now, the fog of war is all about performative show. You're mighty, you demonize the enemy, and always serve as a rally round the flag moment for leaders when there's a conflict. Well, almost always. Is this war different? How's this one going for the U.S. and Israeli leaders who stand shoulder to shoulder while talking at cross purposes about its length and its objectives? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, what is the endgame in Iran? With us from Washington, David Daoud, Senior Fellow on Israel, Hezbollah, and Lebanon at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's think tank. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Anne-Sophie Corbeau is Global Research Scholar at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Rina Bassis, correspondent for the news site Al Monitor. How are you?
Good evening, François. Very well.
And Karim-Émile Bitar, professor at St. Joseph University in Beirut and the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
On the go, by the way, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Before we talk about the latest briefing from the Pentagon, how the war in Iran looks on the official White House social media account. So, Karim-Émile Bitar, that's one among many of these videos. I know you're teaching a course on literature and cinema this semester. What are your thoughts on these memes and these videos that we're seeing on Instagram, on TikTok, on?
I was really shocked by these videos that were published on the official White House website. It brought to mind the book by French theorist Jean Baudrillard, Simulation and Simulacrum, that we start by distorting reality and then we enter into an alternate reality. And the only voice I heard in the international arena condemning this video game view of politics is the voice of the Vatican. The Pope, the first American Pope, has been very vocal in opposing Trump. And paradoxically, the last checks and balances today are the stock markets, and perhaps the Vatican. The US Catholic Church has also been quite vocal. You also have a few European leaders like Pedro Sanchez of Spain, a few Northern European countries. But overall, I'm not seeing enough voices rejecting what is happening. In 2003, at the time of the Iraq War, which was also a war of choice, which also led to an unmitigated disaster, we saw a vast mobilization of European public opinion. They took to the streets in Paris, in Madrid, in London to say, not in our name. I'm not seeing similar reactions. I understand this because they sympathize with the plight of the Iranian people who have been suffering under a tyrannical regime for 47 years. Yet, when I hear the statements coming out of the White House with a different version every day, with no clear endgame, it seems that this entire war is based on false assumptions, and it will probably end up also in blood. Mistaken ideas always end in blood.
Yeah, again, but there's this question of why the memes?
Well, because this is typical of Trump's ideology, and this is typical of the pop culture that has emerged in the past 15 years. Everything has become, people think that Middle Eastern reality can be changed with a joystick. It started with the first Gulf War, actually. At the time, we only had one journalist, CNN journalist, Peter Arnett, who was in Baghdad. And we started seeing images of a supposedly clean war with surgical strikes. It's only later that we saw the damage. So behind these memes, there's also a trivialization of politics, and people no longer realize the weight of history. This is why Europe should remind Americans that history is not a video game.
We're going to talk about the Europeans in a moment, but David Daoud, let me ask you, are the memes working? Do people think, wow, this is cool?
Well, President Trump has historically tried to appeal to American sensibilities in perhaps unconventional ways. Now, I'm going to set aside the commentary on that because I'm less interested in messaging, which can sometimes be bombastic and can sometimes not be, and more interested in the facts on the ground. We are confronting a regime that has spread bloodshed throughout the region for decades without hesitation. And I'm more interested in the results of the campaign that the United States and Israel are waging against this regime.
But it doesn't bother you when
more
Karim
than,
Emil Betar talks about the trivialization of politics? Do you agree with him on that?
Again, I'm setting that aside because the more important thing is, what are we going to do about a regime that negotiations have not worked with it, conciliation has not worked with it. Over the decades, Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, has taken every opportunity of conciliation as a starting point to continue its regional project. We talk about bloodshed. Unfortunately, lack of confrontation with Iran has not spared the region bloodshed. I won't even talk about the Israelis or the Americans whose deaths Iran has caused. Let's talk about Syria, where in the interest of preserving the regime, right? This is explicit messaging from Tehran. They intervened on behalf of Bashar al-Assad because they viewed his downfall as threatening the regime's existence, and in the process slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Syrians. In Mr. Betar's native Lebanon, Hezbollah, a stated extension of the Islamic Republic, according to their 1985 open letter, continues to drag the country into war after war. Now, look, I'm not necessarily.
We're going to talk about.
David,
I promise we're going to talk about Lebanon shortly. What I'm asking is simply: is Donald Trump's reasons for going to war working? That was my question, and his messaging, is it working?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Again, I think you need to distinguish the reasons from the messaging. The reasons for going to war,
which we'll discuss.
I think, again, yes. Well, you're asking me the question, so I'm trying to respond to it. Again, I'm less interested in the messaging, if you're asking me that. Whether it's working or not, I think the polls will show over time. The reasons for going to war, that Iran has not negotiated in good faith either during these past negotiations, these most recent round of negotiations, or historically, I think is absolutely true. Now, again, does that necessarily mean that we should have pursued a regime change in Iran, or we should be pursuing regime change in Iran? That's a separate question. But the idea that only military force can diminish Iran's regional project, the chaos it has spread in the region, can set back its regional proxies, I think that is absolutely justified.
All right, the use of force certainly talked up at the morning briefing at the Pentagon. By the way, on Monday, while the same White House posted another one of these missile video, this one soundtracked by Nelly's Here Comes the Boom, the Reuters news agency and other outlets positively identifying the date and location of a U.S. Tomahawk missile hitting an area near the Shajareh Tayyibeh girls' school in Minab on the opening day of the war. 150 killed, according to Iranian authorities. The U.S. Secretary of War says a thorough investigation is ongoing and one that goes beyond open source images. Pete Hegseth, who in his remarks to reporters issued a prayer during the briefing.
May the Lord grant unyielding strength and refuge to our warriors, unbreakable protection to them and our homeland, and total victory over those who seek to harm them. And amen. God bless our troops and this mission.
Rina Bassis, your thoughts on that prayer read out by Pete Hegseth there?
Obviously, he's addressing a certain part of American society, maybe more the evangelist base of President Donald Trump, who connect to that. And in a way, and it goes back to the question you just asked both my colleagues about the messaging. And I think there is something very sad here, and it's not regarding so much the content, but the fact that the Trump administration feels that the American voter can't understand anything that is complicated, anything that has also gray shades, not just black and white. And then we arrive to such results of, I don't know, Hollywood clips, TikTok footage that are destined almost for, I don't know, teenagers, adolescents, and not to grown people who can understand, because there are reasons behind the operation, and there are, I would say, even goals, even if they are not so clear. And it's difficult to understand why the Trump administration is so reluctant to explain to the American voters what exactly they are doing, what are the reasons for this war. I mean, Iran, my colleague explained that Iran has been repressing regime for almost 47 years. We all know the numbers of the 30 or 40,000 people that were killed. We all know
at the beginning of the year in those demonstrations.
Of the year, the nuclear aspirations of Iran. We have seen how they use also their ballistic missile project. They are not hesitant to use force against Israel, against other countries, even countries that were supposed to be their allies or partners. So there are a lot of reasons that could be explained instead of arriving to that sort of material, which is, I don't know, not very dignified.
And Sophie Corbeau, two questions then. Do you agree that voters are smarter than they seem and that you can give an explanation? I mean, there have been explanations given by Donald Trump, just not there hasn't been a formal statement since the start. Where there was a press conference late Monday. We'll hear a clip from that. And also, your thoughts on hearing the U.S. War Secretary employ the term warriors instead of soldiers?
So my specialty is more on energy. So if you allow me, I would rather like to comment on that. I have to say that I am not a good public for, the videos which have been released by the US government, but I am not also supposed to be a public for them. For the American audience, right now, they are also concerned about the war, and they are also concerned about the price at the pump, which is a very important signal for people who are going to vote in the midterms. And what I have seen is that both the president, but also the Secretary of War, are trying to reassure the markets. And it was actually well done. I mean, yesterday, oil prices went through the roof relatively, in relative terms. They went way above $100 per barrel. But the president has also been saying, well, the war is going to end soon, whatever that means. And I defer to the other people on this panel to also agree or disagree on what is the end of the war. Is it stopping the nuclear program? Is it stopping as well the ballistic missile? Is it changing the regime? We don't really have a clarity on that. But what is also happening right now, and we have seen just before this call a very rapid decline in oil prices, is that for the first time we have seen a tanker being escorted by the American Navy, and this has basically dropped the prices back to about $80 per barrel. So I think they are trying to do that. However, I would caution that escorting one single cargo is one thing. Escorting all the different cargos which have to go through the Strait of Hormuz in order to resume normal shipping is a totally different matter.
Yeah, let's listen to a clip of Donald Trump. This is from his press conference at his Florida golf club late on Monday, telling reporters the world respects us and, hinting that it could soon be over.
Our country is doing really well. I mean, at a level that nobody thought. We took a little excursion because we felt we had to do that to get rid of some evil. And I think you'll see it's going to be a short-term excursion. How good is our military, right? Amazing.
So, Anne-Sophie Corbeau, I guess I'll ask you why he has eased the minds of markets. By the way, I'm looking at, as we speak live, at the price of Brent crude. It's $89 a barrel. It was down more than that earlier in the day.
Yes, so I have not been following the latest developments because I am following you. I think, there is really this concern about can we realistically escort a certain number of ships through the Strait of Hormuz? I'm sure people have seen a lot of videos. The Strait of Hormuz is very narrow, and it can be, ships can be attacked by a lot of different things. They can be attacked by missiles, they can be attacked by drones, they can be attacked by mines. So there are a lot of different options. Now, to what extent the ships which are going through the Strait of Hormuz, both oil and gas, but also fertilizer, can be safely escorted, this is a very important question. And I think it's going to be up to the companies managing these ships, but also the crews and the insurers to decide whether they want to take the risk.
Yeah, and we're hearing in the last minutes, according to the French news agency AFP, explosions heard in the Bahrain's capital, Manama. So it will be, in the end of the day, the price of a barrel of oil that will determine the length of this war. Can I be down?
Well, American objectives might not be similar to Israel's objectives. For Donald Trump, the stock markets, the price of oil, inflationary pressure will definitely be a factor. He might get tired of this war, get bored. He might want to move to something else, to Cuba. He called it a little excursion, you might have noticed, a little excursion, as if we went to Fontainebleau to spend the Sunday. So he is in a different state of mind than Netanyahu. I think the Israelis would want to go all the way. Already at the end of the 12-day war, they would have loved to go all the way towards regime change. And at the time, it was Donald Trump who tweeted in capital letters asking the Israeli airplanes to fly back, saying, I have struck a deal with the Iranians. So what I'm worried about is that America could opt out very rapidly, and Iran will be stuck with Khamenei Jr. having replaced Khamenei Sr., and Israel might continue its strikes on Lebanon longer. The FT is reporting today that the war on Lebanon will last longer than the war on Iran.
We'll get to that in a moment. The messaging more consistent than out of the White House from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking late on Monday.
Our aspiration is to enable the Iranian people to throw off their yoke of tyranny. In the end, it depends on them, but there's no doubt that through the actions taken so far, we're breaking their bones and our hand is still extended.
Rina Bassis, can Netanyahu keep on fighting without the United States?
No, of course not. I mean, on the Iranian front, it was the American president who decided when it starts. The Israelis said, we have a golden opportunity, let's do it now. But of course, it was the Trump administration who decided, let's go. And it will be the Trump administration who will say, that's it, the operation is finished. And when the Americans finish, the Israelis will have to stop also striking Iran. I mean, that goes without saying even. I think this was clear to Israel and to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from the very beginning. From the beginning of this joint operation, that the clock is ticking. And since the clock is ticking, then Israel needs to strike as much as possible before either President Trump gets bored or his attention is drawn elsewhere, as my colleague very clearly explained. So there is no surprise here. I mean, President Trump said, we will end it soon. He didn't give an exact timetable. We've heard Prior to that, he was talking about 4 weeks. Probably now it's going to be shorter. Israeli security sources have said last week that they would probably need 4 to 5 weeks to sort of finish the job, if you excuse my expression here, which brings us just after the Israeli Passover. It doesn't seem that they will go that far. And in that case, of course, the more they do, the better Israel would be for the day after.
David Daoud, earlier on, Sophie Corbeau was referencing how to ease the international community's mind, and particularly the markets, there had been this escort of a ship through the Strait of Hormuz by the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy, according to the White House in the last minutes, has denied that. And the Energy Secretary has taken down his earlier tweet. At the same time, the news site Axios has been reporting that the U.S. has asked Israel to halt strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure. Have you brought a crystal ball to this conversation, David? Will it be a shorter or a longer war?
Well, I think if Iran has its way, it'll be a shorter war. Unfortunately, I don't think there's, I mean, to Mr. Elbitar's and Ms. Bassist's comments, I think the messaging from the United States here has not been clear on what the intentions are. And I think that is problematic. It's absolutely correct that the Israeli war effort, at least in Iran, will halt as soon as the United States decides to pull out of this conflict. And I think this is something, again, the Iranians and their proxies are acutely cognizant of. Their media, if you look at it, has been laser focused on American polling, the lack of popularity that the war has in the United States, the impact that this may have on President Trump and the Republican Party in the upcoming midterm elections. And I think this is something that President Trump is acutely aware of and may influence his decision whether to pursue this war to the very end or to opt for some of the statements he said to give the Iranians off-ramps or room for negotiation to end the war prematurely. And I think here, look, to go back to your earlier question, it's less the memes that worry me and the lack of a corollary or attached explanation for the necessity of this war with Iran and its regional proxies. I think there is a lack of understanding, unfortunately, among the American public because of Iran's distance, because the conflict between Iran and the United States has become so indirect over the last decade or so. Why this is necessary to serve the American national interest and not just say to protect Israel's security or protect our Gulf states. There is a missed opportunity here by the White House, by President Trump, with his popularity, to explain to the American people that Iran, that its proxies pose a direct threat to the American way of life, that their regional project is meant to ultimately influence the way we live our life at home. And through that, to buy himself time through this war to see it through to completion. So if that is the ultimate part of your earlier question, I think there's a missed opportunity here to explain to the American people the necessity of this war, and that may unfortunately influence President Trump's calculus during this conflict if the numbers start to or continue to go against him.
And Sophie Corbeau, again, we talked about mixed messaging here. It's a retraction we're talking about in the case of that
Yes.
Oil tanker.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, just 40 minutes ago, so the Secretary of War announced that there has been a successful escort of an oil tanker. And then, as you said, I mean, it has been basically denied by the Navy and the tweet has been basically withdrawn, which really highlights the importance of, reliable information coming from the administration, but also underscores how important the transit of oil and natural gas through the Strait of Hormuz is going to be. And for the US president, it's mostly about oil, because I have to say that natural gas is going to impact a lot of people, but it's not going to impact the United States. Actually, the US is more benefiting from the crisis in terms of natural gas and LNG. And
this report, if it's proven true by Axios, that the U.S. is asked Israel to halt strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure. We saw the hitting of that oil depot in Tehran, which has triggered the risk of acid rain in the Iranian capital. But what are your thoughts on again, whether or not it's going to remain volatile across the Persian Gulf in the coming days?
Oh, it's going to remain absolutely volatile. And I think we need to understand that there are two elements here. There is a Strait of Hormuz and whether or not ships can go through. But there is another element, which is also the destruction of the energy infrastructure. And we have seen that all the different countries in the GCC have been impacted, whether they have been traditional allies or, helping a little bit the negotiation like Oman, for example, or other countries. Qatar, for example, is sharing the biggest gas field in the world with Iran. All of them have been impacted. And if that infrastructure is going to be destroyed or damaged, it's going to have a big impact on oil prices and potentially gas prices as well. But there is a real question about, if the US and Israel are going too far in terms of the destruction of oil infrastructure, then there is maybe no way back. And indeed, Iran could actually strike very essential infrastructure with, the means to absolutely destroy them and to inflict lasting damage to the world economy.
Because so far there are infrastructures that have been spared.
There have been infrastructure which have been spared, indeed, in particular the Karg Island. But I am really bringing caution to the debate here because if again this goes too far in terms of the destruction, then retaliation will come. And honestly, I think probably a lot of people have been surprised by the extent to which Iran has been really trying to strike energy infrastructure in the different GCC countries.
And again, that includes Bahrain. As we were coming on air, the French news agency reporting that, Rina Bassiste.
Yes, and we are approaching a very dangerous stage, I think. And if I refer to what was said by my colleagues about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, of course, there is a precedent here. And if the Americans decide to end the war very soon, maybe they reach some sort of an agreement even with Iran about reopening the Strait of Hormuz. But the precedent that was set that Iran is willing to do everything when it's attacked, this precedent won't disappear. And it would mean that even if Iran, the current regime, agrees to sign some sort of an agreement with the Americans or with the international community, they would always have the possibility to do it again, because they have shown that they are willing to do it, that they don't have any problems with that, with closing the Strait of Hormuz. So that's a very big problem, I think, to President Trump, because on the one hand, of course, he has all of his electorate and he wants to stop the rise of the barrels to keep it under $100 at least. But then, on the other hand, we know that the Iranians, they could always go back to behaving the way they behaved. So he's in a bit of a corner. How far should he go in destabilizing, I think, the Iranian regime? And as you mentioned, he's not alone in this, because we have all the other Gulf countries that are also participating in this dance, and each of them has its own interests. On the one hand, for them, of course, the petro industry is the number one concern. But then on the other hand, they need the United States. They need the United States to keep protecting them. They can't do it. They can't do it by themselves. So they also, at a certain manner, they are also stuck in a corner which is not so easy to get out of.
All right, and then there's what earlier Karim-Emile Betar talked about, which is this conflict may be, in fact, shorter than the one that has opened up since March the 2nd, when Hezbollah fired rockets on Israel in Lebanon. More ferocious blasts from Beirut's southern suburbs this Tuesday, more evacuation orders coming out of Israel. The latest airstrikes come as the United Nations talks of 100,000 Lebanese displaced in a single day, a faster pace of displacement compared to 2024, says the UN, during Israel's last war with Hezbollah. And as Karim was mentioning, the Financial Times reporting that on the quiet, Israel has told Arab neighbors to be prepared for a longer campaign in Lebanon than in Iran. The newspaper reports on diplomatic pushback, saying France is offering to help disarm Hezbollah. Can France really help to disarm Hezbollah? The Lebanese state hasn't been able to.
I'm not sure French public opinion would be enthralled with this idea, but Lebanon's authorities definitely need help. The Lebanese government is caught between Iraq and a hard place. Hezbollah had given assurances to the Lebanese president and Lebanese prime minister that it would not enter this war unless it was provoked. And yet, these rockets were fired at Israel. Hezbollah MPs and Hezbollah ministers seem to be caught completely off guard. So I think that this was clearly an Iranian decision, a decision by the IRGC to expand the scale of the conflict. The problem is that very rapidly Israel jumped on the occasion to try to finish the job, as they say, in Lebanon. And as you mentioned, this has caused a huge humanitarian catastrophe. Israel has asked 700,000 civilians to flee their homes in less than a few hours. So there is a risk of this becoming a massive economic and social crisis and potentially a political crisis at a time when Lebanon, for the very first time in decades, was finally trying, albeit slower than I would have wanted, to exert its authority. In August last year, the Lebanese government took a historical decision and asked the Lebanese army to exert its control over the entire territory, meaning to not only disarm Hezbollah, but also disarm all Palestinian factions. The Lebanese army was starting to do this job, but the Lebanese army is in a situation of overstretch. It is facing a double bind. People are asking the army.
So when the French president dispatched his chief of staff last weekend to Beirut, really, can there be a country like France? Can it really help to do any of what you're describing? It sounds
to be honest, I'm pretty skeptical. But we will have to think of a mechanism to replace UNIFIL, because America and Israel.
This is the UN peacekeeping force.
Absolutely. So a formula that could be acceptable perhaps to Israel is if France, with the United Arab Emirates, with certain other countries, send forces. But the Lebanese government offered direct negotiations to Israel. They called Tom Barak, a close friend of Donald Trump, who is currently the U.S. envoy to Turkey. And Tom Barak said in his blunt way of speaking, this is bullshit. You have to start by disarming Hezbollah. The problem is that it is easier said than done. Hezbollah remains quite influential on the Lebanese political arena. And when Israel strikes this massively, it paradoxically ends up strengthening Hezbollah. Hezbollah was losing its own base of supporters. It no longer had any allies in the Christian or Sunni community. But if Israel decides to reoccupy Lebanon, to set up a wide zone until the Litani River, it would end up providing fodder to Hezbollah's argumentation that they need deterrence, while the war of October-November 2024 showed that all this talk about deterrence and equilibrium of terror was completely uncredible, not credible at all.
David Daoud, how far should Israel go?
Well, I think let's assess Lebanon's actions so far and see what the Israelis should do in response. The fact of the matter is that Lebanon has had not just a year and a half since the November 2024 ceasefire to act against Hezbollah, but really since 2006, when a Lebanese governmental proposal, Fuad Sanira's 7 points, became the basis of Resolution 1701, which did require the total disarmament of all armed groups, including Hezbollah, throughout all Lebanese territory. The problem is that Hezbollah, as Mr. El-Bitar noted, retained massive popular support among Lebanese Shiites, and it's deterred Lebanon through those 18 years from acting against Hezbollah. Unfortunately, since the November ceasefire, those factors have not changed. Demonstration after demonstration, from Nasrallah's funeral to the municipal elections last May, Hezbollah has demonstrated that it retained this massive Shiite support.
Israel didn't keep its side of the bargain either, keeping soldiers in southern Lebanon.
Hold on, I would appreciate my ability to continue responding. Sure. I will get to that point. So again, let me put on, just to address that very briefly, let me put on my hat as an international lawyer here. A ceasefire agreement is not a return to the status quo ante bellum. It is effectively a contract. If you fulfill your end of the bargain, Lebanon, then Israel has to fulfill its end of the bargain. If Lebanon doesn't, or doesn't do so sufficiently, then the other state, the victim state, in this case Israel, has the right to take self-help measures. This is baseline laws of armed conflict. But returning to my initial point, kind of going into that, the Lebanese government remained deterred from taking proactive action against Hezbollah, both because of its domestic constraints, its lack of resources that Mr. Al-Bitar noted, but also this fear of provoking civil war. This led Lebanon to not adopting on September 5th of 2025 the LAF's disarmament plan, but welcoming it ambiguously amidst the walkout by Shiite ministers, then changing the timeline of the disarmament plan from total disarmament by the end of 2025. President Owen said this, Prime Minister Nawaf Salam had said this in August, that this would result in total disarmament by the end of 2025, to constraining this to the South Litani area. And then we go to January 8th of 2026, when the LAF declares taking operational or effective control over the South Litani area, and that's proven to be false. And the problem isn't just that Lebanon, whether we take Lebanon's actions at face value or not, the problem is that they have not outpaced Hezbollah's ongoing regeneration efforts. Right? This is something that Hezbollah has admitted to doing, that it is rearming, that it is regenerating its capabilities. This is confirmed by Israeli strikes on Hezbollah's regeneration personnel involved in regeneration efforts. It's also confirmed by the Syrian authorities, who have, over the past year, routinely seized weapons shipments and funds destined for Hezbollah through Syrian territory. So this has left Israel in a position where it has to watch Lebanon being unable or unwilling, or both, to put an end to Hezbollah's regeneration efforts. And this leaves it entitled to engage in self-help measures. Now, Hezbollah knew this going into this war. Hezbollah predictably, like the Israeli response has been predictably ferocious. Nevertheless, whether this was the IRGC firing on behalf of Hezbollah, whether there's a disconnect, I hear this narrative of a disconnect between the political and the military branches of the organization. Regardless, the weapons, the rockets were fired at Israel. Hezbollah has doubled down on its declaration of war against Israel in defiance of Beirut's decisions. And Beirut has since then, since even its unprecedented declaration on March 2nd, prescribing Hezbollah's military activities, ordering the LAF to disarm, has showed nothing but hesitation in following through with that order with action. And I mean, we know that Commander Rodolphe Heikel has continued to insist on dealing with Hezbollah through the same conciliation, through the same negotiation and dialogue that has allowed Hezbollah, which Hezbollah has exploited, to continue rearmament.
Rina Bassist, two questions then. One, should the Israelis take up that offer of direct negotiations from Lebanon's president? And two, this you heard Karim Emil Bitar warning that the longer Israel stays, the more popular Hezbollah will become.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's a question of should or should not. I mean, the Israelis already said that they are not really, unofficially, they are not really interested in that, because there is nothing new in that. I mean, this is the same. We have the ceasefire agreement. The Lebanese government needs to abide by it and do what it promised to do, to disarm Hezbollah. There will not be any other talks on stages beyond that before this is completed. And I have to say that the Lebanese government has to be praised. I mean, they have been very, very courageous, issuing declarations that the military branch of Hezbollah is illegal. This is really a historical even. And it was not an easy thing to do, I think. But putting that aside, the Lebanese government was also very quick to announce that the first stage of implementing the ceasefire agreement was completed, which meant that for them, the Lebanese army has disarmed Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon, which was not at all the case. On the contrary, Israel for months, and this is not related to the beginning of the operation in Iran, for months Israel has been warning, saying, look, Hezbollah, not only they are still there, not only the Lebanese army doesn't manage to deliver, not by its own fault, we have heard, I mean, they have a lot of problems, not enough equipment, not enough experience. Maybe they have too many connections, family connections or other connections on the ground. You have a lot of explanations, but the fact is that they did not manage to disarm Hezbollah, and more so, militants of Hezbollah are coming back to the same areas which were supposed to be cleaned from Hezbollah presence. And there are even reports, and this is coming from the Lebanese media, that it's not simple Hezbollah activists or militants, but people from the Radwan force, which is the commando units of Hezbollah. So this is very serious. Israel has been warning, and the Lebanese army is just not able to cope with that. Which is why I think Israel will keep bombing until...
Should there be an outside force then to help, like has been suggested, revamp or rethink?
I don't think this is an option for Israel at the moment. I mean, Israel has been waiting on the Lebanese military, on the international community. It didn't happen. There is a determination on the Israeli side now to continue until there is a clean zone in the south of Lebanon with 0 Hezbollah people, 0 tunnels, 0 Hezbollah ammunition.
All right, that could happen later than sooner, the way you describe it. Inside of Israel, a second death from an Iranian missile strike Monday in the central city of Or Yehuda. The visiting German foreign minister earlier going to the site of the March 1st attack that killed 11 in this town of Beit Shemesh. And yet, support from Israel's closest European ally, talking about Germany still, is no longer a blank check, it seems. Friedrich Merz calling for the immediate halt to annexation projects in the West Bank and aligning with the EU on Iran.
Germany and Europe, we have no interest in a war without end. We have no interest in the dissolution of Iran's territorial integrity, statehood or economic viability. A scenario such as we've seen in Libya, Iraq or other countries in the region would also harm us all. This affects our security, our energy supply and potentially also the situation surrounding migration.
And Sophie Corbeau talking about energy supply and surrounding migration, a German chancellor who feeling the heat from an anti-immigrant far right and who has to deal with an ailing car industry at home. This is his worst nightmare, what's going on in the Middle East?
It's the worst nightmare of all the European countries because, we were just about to move away from the crisis of 2022. It's very important to remember that gas prices 10 days ago were still relatively high, but we were getting there. And here we go, there is another crisis. And this crisis is not only impacting natural gas, it's impacting oil. So this is a dual crisis, which if it continues, it's going to impact the economy, is of course going to have a huge impact on the industrial capabilities and the industrial competitiveness of Europe. So this is really the worst timing. And I think a lot of the industrials in Europe must be thinking, oh no, not another crisis. And how can we get out of this vicious cycle in order to maybe bring back some of the European competitiveness? But this is becoming harder and harder. And by the way, it's not only Europe which is exposed, it's also a lot of other countries. But crucially, maybe less the United States because, again, they have relatively low gas prices. Oil, this is different. This is global. But gas, they are protected and preserved.
And exporting their LNG. We'll have to leave it there. Anne-Sophie Corbeau, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank David Daoud in Washington, Rina Bassist, Karim Emile Betard. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.